Welcome.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Living Well with MS.
This show comes to you from Overcoming MS,
show
the world's leading
Overcoming
MS
healthy lifestyle
podcast,
which
You'll
helps
find
people
useful
live a
links
full
and bonus
healthy life
information
through the
there.
Overcoming MS
Don't forget
program.
to subscribe to the podcast.
We interview a range of experts and people with multiple sclerosis
to help
Please
others
remember,
find us.
all opinions
This show is
expressed
made
are their
possible
own by the Overcoming
Receive
MS
monthly
community.
tips and
Our
ideas
theme
about
music is by
living well
Claire
with
and Matt
MS.
Dean. By signing
Our
up for
host
our
is
newsletter
Geoff Alex.
at
Our videos are edited by Laura Greenwood,
and I'm the
newsletter.
producer, Regina
And
Beach.
now,
Have
let's
questions
meet our
or
guest.
ideas to share? Email us at podcast@overcomingms.org. We'd love to hear from you. The Living Well with MS podcast is for private, non-commercial use and exists to educate and inspire our community of listeners. We do not offer medical advice. For medical advice, please contact your doctor or other licensed healthcare professional.
Welcome to the latest edition of the Living Well with MS podcast. Joining me on this edition is Bee Grzegorzek, I think I've got it right, from the organisation Attitude is Everything. And we'll get straight into asking you about what that is. So straight away, firstly, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And could you give us an overview of what Attitude is Everything does?
Yeah, so Attitude is Everything is a non-profit organisation. It's dedicated to improving the access to music and live events for disabled audiences, artists and professionals. We'll go into depth a bit more later, but just some of our work includes our Next Stage Artist Network, Beyond the Music Professionals Network, the Inclusive Communities work that I manage, Volunteer Mystery Shoppers, Future Leaders, our Live Events Access Charter, training, and that isn't even an exhaustive list. So that's kind of the overview of kind of the main things that we do.
But so basically, sort of music events, making them more accessible to everyone.
Yeah, so pulling together
their ability level.
Yeah, and championing deaf and disabled artists and professionals and audience members, and just ensuring that kind of everyone has a voice through what we're doing. And yeah, just kind of taking a multi-pronged approach to improving accessibility to then work with the industry.
Okay, and so. Just this is a little extra, not in the question, but so a lot of people with MS appear to be perfectly able, but actually have hidden accessibility needs. So you include, things that are not, are you talking about people in wheelchairs only, or is it people with invisible accessibility needs as well?
So we're talking about everyone. We're talking about people that have visual impairments, hearing, hidden disabilities. So like I suffer from endometriosis, and that's kind of a big thing that led me into working in this area. We even look into mental health. We also look into intersectionality as well, and the intersectionality between disability and different kind of, I hate using like underrepresented as a word, but protected characteristics. But yeah, it's for anyone that identifies as disabled, neurodivergent, and even for people that haven't necessarily come to terms with the word disability. I know that a lot of the deaf community won't necessarily align with the word disabled because it's a cultural shift for them. It's their culture of kind of finding alternative means to communicate. But for us, it's about kind of a broad umbrella term, and that if you sit under the term disability, that's great. If not, but you still have access requirements and you're not ready to be called kind of disabled or like use that term, then we're still there to support and improve access.
And so what has historically been the biggest barriers keeping disabled people away from attending live events?
So in our training, so I sometimes deliver training as well as part of my role, and we break it down into 3 different areas. So there's environmental barriers, organisational barriers, and I love this word, attitudinal barriers. So environmental barriers are like the physical features that may lead to poor access, so like ramp gradients not being high enough, not having an ambulatory accessible toilet, that kind of thing. Organisational barriers are barriers within the ways that organisations are organised. So they usually happen when disabled people aren't consulted when provisions are designed from day one. And then attitudinal barriers are barriers that kind of derive from disabled people in the way that they're perceived and treated in society. So prejudice, ignorance, lack of education, confidence. So I think the biggest barriers out of those 3, they all kind of combine because I don't know, say if you're going to a festival or a music venue, there could be lack of, I don't know, accessible toilet, for example, but then there could also be issues with communication with staff, and there might be prejudice there, or there may not be even just like general communication. Like some people don't necessarily know how to communicate with a disabled person, which from my point of view is absurd as regards to kind of that person is a person, and that their disability is a part of them, as some people see that as a trait. So, you know, the fact that people kind of, there was a study done, I'm sure I'll go into it later, that was 2/3 of the population, I think it was, were worried about engaging with disabled people because they get it wrong. And that kind of attitudinal approach, people tend to either not communicate or do it in a way that isn't appropriate. So yeah, I think all three, the environmental, organisational and attitudinal barriers, all kind of coexist together.
Yeah, so there's things I saw the other day. It was actually about someone dealing with transport, but they helped them with transport, but then they patted them on the head, and there was someone in a wheelchair. There's like,
or like things like I've had it before when I've had my mobility aid, when I've had my walking stick, and people will go to even little things like open doors before I actually need any help and I haven't asked for it, or it, like there's helpful things like giving up a seat and stuff like that. That's great, but when it comes to what happened to you, what's wrong with you, or do you need extra help with this because you've got your stick, like I don't get treated the same way when I don't have a visual aid for it. So it's clear that from my lived experience, the views of disability, it definitely alters something in people's minds if they haven't got that lived experience.
Yeah. And have you seen improvements over the last couple of decades?
Yeah, big time. So Attitude is Everything's been around for just over 20 years now. And in general, like there's been huge advances within kind of, there's a big popularization, as I'm sure you'll know, about kind of diversity and inclusion in workplaces and spaces. And I feel like that's kind of brought more prevalence into inclusivity in general. I know that a lot of organizations, including like music venues, festivals, they now have to have policies regarding that. So there's definitely been change in kind of that area. Also, we have our Live Events Access Charter, which is our accreditation system. So it was first launched in 2001, and it basically provided frameworks for venues, festivals, grassroots venues and spaces, and outdoor events. And it basically covers kind of online information, policies, to anything around access at the venue or site. So we've done a fair few accreditations over the past few years and worked with venues and festivals. But also, more live music spaces now support deaf and disabled people to provide reasonable adjustments. Since the Equality Act came in 2010, there's now obviously the responsibility to provide reasonable adjustments. So I think it's quite common now for a lot of venues and festivals to have access tickets, to have kind of companion tickets, to kind of factor that in more. Even down to the fact that there's accessible campsites, there's more live events that are becoming more inclusive as regards to like factoring in access in general. So I think there has been a real shift. And I think it's been fueled on as well by there's more representation in society, I think, of disabled people. I think there's a lot more that can be done, but the progress that we've been doing and also just societally has kind of coincided.
Yeah, I think, and it ties to what you said before about whether people have lived it or not. I think from what I've found is there's a lot of people who are trying to do the right thing, but some of them don't understand what that is, what that should be.
Yeah.
And you sort of think, okay, you clearly are trying to do it, but you kind of didn't get that right because actually that wouldn't work. But they are trying, so yeah.
It's true, and it is, but then it's the challenge of, and it comes down to kind of anyone that's got intersectional traits, whether they've got, marginalized characteristics or experiences, then comes the narrative of, well, it's technically not that person's job to educate you on how to do that. Like, we've got a world of resources we've got online, and Attitude is Everything is a prime example. Like, that's all out there. But I think there's still a narrative in today's society where there's almost an expectation that you'll explain why it's not okay. And actually, as somebody personally living with chronic illness, I don't have the energy. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's really simple. I don't have the energy to say, actually, no, what you said was really inappropriate, because a lot of the time people will meet that with, I don't know, their own feelings. It's like setting boundaries. Like, people tend to react because they think they've done something wrong. But we've got the whole wealth of the internet and more representation, everything that is really helping with that people can turn to.
So one of the things that Overcoming MS encourages is good mental health. It's one of the pillars for Overcoming MS. And certainly for a lot of people, getting out, going to music events, going to festivals, doing things that they might have done before diagnosis is certainly good for their mental health. So how can people who have visible or invisible accessibility needs attend music events? Is it straightforward?
I think it depends on a lot of factors. One of the biggest things is access information. I personally, when I'm looking at going to a venue or an event, I'll try and find their access information online to try and help me navigate going into that space. I think an immediate barrier is that if events or venues don't have access information, people are going in not informed to that space, and that can create anxiety, it can create stress. So my biggest tips around it is just kind of making sure that if there isn't access information, then again, it's that like laborious effect of like, okay, so they haven't provided that, but now I would suggest contacting the venue directly and asking for that. But again, it's kind of the labour of it. So I think all of this is kind of with a pinch of salt of whatever is in people's capacity to do, I guess. But my first tip would be to look at kind of online access information. And also I have a little like prep kit that I take with me. So like noise cancelling earphones, comfy clothes. I also take time to like mentally prepare. So like if I know that I'm going to be going out later in the evening to a gig, I might have some quiet time beforehand. I mentally will try and like ramp myself up to be ready for energy levels, taking rest. I think it's imperative that people with disabilities and chronic illness attend these events because, I mean, there's been scientific studies of the benefit of music to mental health in general. But I think, yeah, it's not as straightforward as some people may think to make an informed decision on that. But also I think during the event, if you choose to go to an event, it's really important to check in with yourself during it. Don't be afraid to like take breaks, go and have a moment outside and just check in with where your body and your mind is at with it.
And is there things that people should look for if they're considering going to a music venue?
Yeah, so I wrote a really
sort of think which ones.
Yeah, I wrote literally three points for this. Access information, so looking online on their website to see if they've got that. Also, we have our charter accreditation, so it might be that you see a little stamp of approval on a venue from Attitude is Everything, which means that we've worked with that venue to make sure that their accessibility standards are up to scratch. But also a little top tip with it is the tone of interaction with staff. So I find that if there isn't access information, you drop an email to the box office and there's not inclusive, like say, like, I don't know, for an example, we'll deal with you in XYZ way in an email, that would make me not want to go to a venue. So I think it's about scoping out and using the information that you have. And I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because I know that not all spaces, there's not that much choice as regards to accessibility and having a safe and happy visit. And one of my colleagues the other day made a really great statement that in an ideal world, disabled people would be able to access live music and be immersed in it and not have to worry about the access side of things and what's around. And that's an amazing goal to have. But the reality is to kind of get yourself as informed as possible on the spaces that you're going to, I think.
So you said there's an accreditation. Is that, do people get like rated? Can you see how good someone is based on your accreditation?
Yeah, so at the moment we base it on bronze, silver, gold and platinum. So bronze is kind of the basic levels of accessibility, down to kind of like ensuring that the space is level access, and then it kind of progresses up from there. So the way that it's safe to say that our charter is constantly changing and constantly growing. We've been doing quite a bit of reflective work over how we can move it forwards at the moment. So I'll just give a cheeky update. Stay tuned in the Attitude is Everything World for some updates, but I can't say too much. But at the moment, it's a system of people need to get the bronze level at venues and festivals to then move up to silver. So it's not that anything will be missed along the way. But yeah, it goes bronze, silver, gold, platinum as kind of standard levels.
And bronze isn't bad. So it's not that they've done nothing at bronze.
It's that they've got provisions in place. Right. So it's that they've got the level that is needed for people with, let's say, general accessibility needs to attend. So that's down to even things like I said, level access, ensuring that there's like handrails at the right areas. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Even things like the online access information is a stipulation for us. So it needs to be laid out in an accessible format. especially for people that use screen readers or assistive technology. So it's kind of, what I would say is that rather than it's the basics, it's the foundations, it's the kind of bare bones of this is the level of access that you start at, and then you grow from it.
Mm-hmm. And is there anything people should do when they arrive at a music venue?
So it depends on kind of the route that they've taken to get there. If they're turning up with having not kind of spoken to anyone in advance or booked any kind of accessibility requirement services, then I would say to check in with the box office and just kind of notify them if you feel comfortable to, and also if you need support or you have requirements during your visit. Some people may not. Some people might just... I've done it before where I've checked in with the box office at the start of an event because I felt like I might get anxious and I wanted to notify them. But on the flip side of that, I'd say that if you're attending an event where, say, a much bigger event like the O2, where you've done like an access accreditation, where you've got to kind of give evidence, and we'll go into that a little bit later, but say that you've kind of made them aware in advance, most venues and festivals will have individual kind of steps around that. So it might be that you go to the box office, or say that you're a wheelchair user, it might be that you're given someone's number when you get to the door so they can aid you with getting into the building. But I think, yeah, primarily if you feel comfortable making the staff there aware, and also if you have any issues or you need help during your time in that venue, speak to a member of staff.
And what about sort of during the night? What if there's a problem with accessibility needs during the night? What would you do then?
I think my first thing is make yourself safe. I think mentally and physically. Something that I've kind of learned the hard way with accessibility as a gig goer is that sometimes I've really put myself in uncomfortable situations, and I think you've got to protect your mind and your body. And if you don't feel like your needs are being met, then maybe the safest thing to do is to leave that building and go and get some space, whether that's a break or to actually leave. But as regards to kind of raising it further, we actually have a report and issue form on our website, which is a one-time incident, a single incident form, where you can report to us what the accessibility issues were, whether even that's down to language and terminology or staff interactions. It doesn't have to be just physical access. It can be any of those barriers that we mentioned earlier. And then what we can do from there, we have our amazing mystery shoppers. So they are volunteers that volunteer to go to different venues and feedback reports on the accessibility. So when we have the issue form, you're welcome to report it to us, but I think it's also really important to report it to the venue. So with as much detailed information as possible, so that then they can ensure that they kind of reflect on it and take action from it. But also that report and issue form, it could be that you've done that step, you've spoken to the venue, you're not happy with their response, and then you can report an issue through us. And then we also like, it's a soft way of working as regards to, we understand, as I hope you realise during this podcast, that the barriers that face people and that are presented by society. So I think it's even a case of having someone to talk to who gets it, and being able to do something about it and not feeling like your voice is silenced.
So I think so far, I know I've got in my mind sort of going to venues that are, like you're saying, the O2. So in a city, flat, solid, dry, you think, okay, yeah, I can see that, there's not removing steps and things like that is necessary, obviously, and there's a few things. But it's not a massive shift for them. And then the other thing that you mentioned is festivals. Now, this is international, but in the UK, the biggest one is Glastonbury, and there's other huge ones like Benicassim, and there's all huge ones in America and stuff. So they're massive. Some of them, anyway, are basically towns in the countryside for 4 or 5 days, huge areas. Glastonbury is notorious for being muddy. Is it realistic to go to something like that, like a rural, specifically like a rural festival, if you've got accessibility needs?
I think the short answer is yes, but I think, again, it needs to be an informed decision. So I think it is realistic, but with any festival, like accommodations, bathrooms, provisions, they can all become challenging. You've got hundreds, if not thousands, of people using them. And I think it takes a special type of person to go to a festival in the first place. And I will say I'm one of those special people, just as regards to the levels of like baby wipes and dry shampoo, like without access requirements, festivals can be challenging. I think that there are provisions in place to support with this. So like a lot of festivals now will provide accessible campsites, so people with accessibility needs can be in the same area, but also there'll be toilet provisions there that are accessible. Some will have changing places, accessible showers. Also, just on a personal note, the level of community that you get in an accessible campsite is absolutely beautiful. Like if you've forgotten a jumper, or I don't know, your personal assistant has to take a break, there's going to be someone else there that completely understands and just chips in and helps. So it's a great environment to be in. Festivals will have viewing platforms, as well as accessible toilets throughout the site, ideally. But I also won't lie, the mud and the weather can be really challenging, especially for people that are manual wheelchair users or use mobility aids. So I would suggest that it's worth thinking about mobility aids before going to the festival. I realise that it comes with financial barriers, but if people have electric chairs over manual chairs, that will be easier to get around. Even down to, I changed the walking stick that I use so that it's foldable, so that when my health is a little bit better, I can rely on my core strength and not worry about kind of having to navigate that in a busy environment. I realise that that's also privileged, that my condition isn't constant. But I think even down to things like what ferrules you use on the bottom of a mobility aid. So for anyone that doesn't know, that's the little bit that goes on the bottom of a walking stick. And you can get kind of like high grade levels that are like snow, ice, everything. So I think it is realistic, but I think there's an awful lot of planning. There's also a lot of liaising with access teams, getting things like wristbands sorted, personal assistant tickets if you need it. But I don't think it's unrealistic to say that people with accessibility needs can go to a festival.
And you've got ones that, so you accredit those as well, so you can sort of see which ones sort of meet standards. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So at the moment on our website, we've got a list of our charter venues that have been accredited as well, if anyone wants to check it out.
And for accommodation, would you like putting up your own tent is going to be difficult for a lot of people? Is that something? Mm-hmm. Would you have things like that, like people help you put up tents? And
yeah. I mean, number one, pop-up tents are the best. I brought a pop-up tent to Latitude last year, and I was so grateful. But also, there'll be people there to help, like marshals, and kind of volunteers that are there to run the campsite. I mean, I've put a few tents up in my time. It's only been 6 months with this organisation, and I think I've put up more tents than months that I've worked here. So yeah, it's all about that community spirit, and people that are free and around to do it will chip in to do it. And it tends to be with accessible campsites that there is like an information hub, or there's a big tent, or there's an access box office so that you can go and ask for help with things as well.
And so the other thing, mentioned mental health, but the other sort of the pillar probably most people are aware of with overcoming MS is the dietary component, which is sort of a plant-based whole food diet, really. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to a festival or a venue, is it likely that would be met? Would you, I mean, obviously you can't really go anywhere else. If you're in a massive festival, you're going to be limited to what's available in the festival. So is it likely that you have dietary requirements met?
I think it can be a mixed bag with it. I think we're lucky with the times that we live in as regards to the choice of vegan and plant-based foods. As an example, again, when I went to Latitude, what I did was I found one safe place to eat. I have a lot of allergies, and I also have dietary requirements for my health condition. And it really stumped me at first. I panicked, I won't lie. I kind of looked around at all the vendors and I was like, where am I going to get something? And luckily there was a co-op on site, but then everyone ransacks it every day. I ended up with just a pot noodle one day, which wouldn't have been ideal. I think there's a level of prep again, that you either kind of know that you'll find something at some point and you'll probably have to stick to it. I think I ate noodles nearly every day of the week at that festival, but also people do I bought snacks with me, like my creature comfort snacks that I knew were safe foods. Other people will bring like a little gas cooker oven and bring food from home. I know that some of our volunteers bought some salmon with them and like cooked it in little tin foil. So I think, especially if you're driving or you've got a lift, then the capabilities there of like bringing a cool box and things, it is a bit more challenging as regards to keeping food cool and things like that, especially in summer. But I think you can get the first couple of days sorted of the festival, then you've had time to scope out what food you can and can't eat, and you've kind of found a safe base from there.
And so one of the things with venues, because I've been to a few different things. So we in the UK we've got an access card, which makes things simpler, because then you go through the hassle of actually being assessed essentially once, but you don't have to do it for every single venue. So are they useful schemes? So there's a number of different ones. Access card in the UK, there's Hint, I think, which is a Welsh scheme, and other ones sort of internationally. Are they useful things? Are they things that you would recommend getting that set up?
I think outside of kind of my attitude as everything hat, I spent quite a while not getting an access card. And then I think it was my sister, again, with the O2, went to the O2, she showed her card and it was as easy as that. I don't think she had to book access provisions prior to. I know some things you might do, so definitely check it out before you go. But they are a less laborious way of communicating your needs, I think. So like with the access card, for example, you get different boxes on there that say what your needs are. So you might have a personal assistant one, you might have a little icon that means you can't stand for long. And rather than as a disabled person or chronically ill person that constantly has to navigate that, it's a lot less energy to be able to show a card, and they are recognised in a lot of venues and festivals. The other thing that I say is that we do suggest that ideally venues and festivals don't ask for evidence, because of the fact that why should we have to give over a medical diagnosis to get into, I don't know, a gig, and have to share that personal information. So I think having an access card or a Hint card or that kind of accessibility scheme is helpful. And I think I would recommend it, but there will also be places that do let people in without evidence. There will also be places that don't necessarily accept that as evidence. But overall, I think I would, from my personal experience, recommend it.
And if people need a +1, a carer to come with them, is that generally accepted?
Yeah, so again, we advise at Attitude is Everything that when an access customer needs support from personal assistant, that ticket is free, because it's a reasonable adjustment under the Equality Act. We would say that person wouldn't necessarily be able to attend that gig or festival without their personal assistant. Some venues and festivals, they'll do like a half price ticket and then a half price PA ticket, which is the same thing. There are still places that don't necessarily do it. We are advocating for change around that, because it is a reasonable adjustment. I'm not comparing assistance dogs or animals to human beings, but it's the same as having an assistance dog on site. That is an auxiliary aid for someone as much as a personal assistant is. So our guidance is that is what we recommend. But again, it's worth checking out access information and websites to see if that is an option.
And mostly we've been talking about people going to venues as an attendee, but I know there's at least 2 or 3 people who follow Overcoming MS who are actually in themselves artists. So do you cover that side of things? I think you mentioned as well there's an artist program. So how does that work in the other side of it, the actual performer?
Yeah. So I have been very cheeky and asked my colleague Hilary to send over some information for me, because she does an amazing job of managing the Next Stage project, and I just wanted to ensure that I get this right. So we've got 3 different parts of this. So our Next Stage program includes a peer support network for deaf, disabled and neurodivergent music makers, and that's from DJs to solo artists. It doesn't necessarily need to be bands. Bands are welcome though. So we design and host workshops and talks on communicating access requirements, navigating access support in funding applications, to 101 of music publishing, facilitated by our colleagues. The aim of the program is to build confidence and create access via campaigning and community building. So it's really that kind of like peer-to-peer in the disabled community as well. Also, a statistic that Hilary sent over to me was 70% of artists had withheld details of a health condition or impairment due to being worried that doing so would cause problems and impact a relationship with a promoter, venue or festival. And that came from our Next Stage artist snapshot. So that's 70% of artists that were in that study. And out of that, we created our Just Ask campaign. So it seeks to encourage promoters and venues to ask for access requirements. So that, again, that labour isn't on the side of the artist or professional. It's the venue or the promoter that's actually going, what are your access requirements, as they would with an audience member. As part of this, we've had sessions about approaching conversation with access needs for artists and promoters. And this has included highlighting the musicians' union's access rider process and having discussions on resource sharing. So there's more to come on that in the next year. And then finally, we have our DIY events access guide, DIY events guide, which can be found on our Attitude is Everything website. And we highlight tools and processes to make gigs more accessible. So things like communicating with attendees, the access of the venue, and the event ticketing page, having accessible seating. So this lovely Hilary has put in a little shout out to our live events charter to ensure that industry professionals that are working within organisations are actually factoring in artist requirements. And typically in the industry, I think there has been more of an audience focus. And like I said, we are constantly kind of reassessing our live events charter, and we're having more of an artist and professional focus in there as well. So I think, yeah, not I don't mean this in a horrible way as regards to like an afterthought, but often venues and festivals and live music events won't factor that in until you have someone turn up that has access requirements, and then it's kind of reactive rather than proactive. So the Next Stage programme is all about the peer support, it's all about the community, but it's also about putting that responsibility onto the industry to ensure that artists have their access requirements asked about and met, but also to ensure that artists and professionals within our network know how to advocate for themselves and know how to kind of push to get their access requirements met as well.
Right, thank you very much for that, and thanks to Hilary also, I think.
Shout out to Hilary.
I think you mentioned about just the community. If you go to a festival, actually, it's quite. So I just wanted to mention, because I first went to Glastonbury Festival when I was quite fairly newly diagnosed, and I kind of thought I felt a little bit of a fraud initially, because I couldn't walk nearly as well as I had been able to, but I could still get around. I didn't use any mobility, I didn't use a stick or anything at the time. But I don't think I could have gone without it, because it gave me sort of camping that was closer, that wasn't as crowded, that gave me a little bit of an area to have a little bit of a chill out. There's some shortcut routes they give you and things like that. And there was just a number of different things that did make it. So I felt that actually when you went into accessible camping, and I've been to a few different ones now, that it doesn't ever feel like you don't feel like, oh, you have to be like, in a wheelchair. There will be people in wheelchairs, but most people are not. Most people are, I would say the majority of people have an invisible condition. And as you said, a very, very nice, friendly, inclusive group. So I'd absolutely encourage it. So firstly, thanks very much for joining us, Bee Grzegorzek. I'll try from Attitude is Everything. Do check out the links in the show notes to your organisation, and as you said, have a look on websites for accessibility, and carry on going to music venues. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Welcome. Thank you for listening to this episode of Living Well with MS. Please check out this episode's show notes at overcomingms.org/podcast. You'll find useful links and bonus information there. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And please rate and review the show to help others find us. This show is made possible by the Overcoming MS community. Our theme music is by Claire and Matt Dean. Our host is Geoff Alex. Our videos are edited by Lorna Greenwood. And I'm the producer, Regina Beach. Have questions or ideas to share? Email us at podcast@overcomingms.org. We'd love to hear from you. The Living Well with MS podcast is for private, non-commercial use and exists to educate and inspire our community of listeners. We do not offer medical advice. For medical advice, please contact your doctor or other licensed healthcare professional.